Welcome everyone. Thank you for watching this develop, build, containerize ASP.NET Core web application and finally moving it to Azure Kubernetes services. My name is Riju and I'm a cloud solution architect at Microsoft. And here is my Twitter handle so you can connect me anytime in this Twitter, post me a message or tag me anywhere you want me to participate on. Now in this, I have kind of divided into multiple different sections. So I kind of try to show you step by step. So I have got a virtual machine running in Azure, which has got all the tools installed. Now, first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to connect my VS Code to that virtual machine and then create an ASP.NET Core application and containerize that. So I create a container out of the source code and then push it to the Docker Hub or Azure Container Registry, whichever is the preferred way of putting it, and then host it in the Azure Container Instance, which is a service available in Azure where you can host any container without really worrying too much about the inline infrastructure. And then finally, we'll move that container into Azure Kubernetes services, and we'll see that life cycle step by step. All the code I'm doing, all the script I'm using are all available in my GitHub page. So note down this URL. You do not have to write anything during the event. So you keep watching and later point in time you can refer. In fact, in that I have also posted some videos which will help you see the things in step-by-step manner. So I have broken those videos into multiple different sections. Even I have an additional video where I talk about how you can basically create the virtual machine which I'm using for my demo. All right, so let's go into the demo, and from now onwards we'll not be watching any slide. So what I'm going to do is that I'm using Windows Terminal here. You can see in my screen, and in that terminal I have got few variables which I'm going to use quite frequently. So these are basically a bash variable I have, right? So if you say echo $G, it will show you that's a resource group name. So what I have already in my Azure subscription is a resource group called GA2021. And in that resource group, if you notice, right, you'll find that I have got few resources. So let me, so you can see that I've got virtual machine, and related to the virtual machine, I've got network and NIC, storage, etc. And then I have got a container registry where I can push my containers to, right? So if you go inside the container registry, you might find some repositories, right? So which I'm gonna use in my demo, right? So you can see that I can just delete the repository so that it's now clean. Now that's the repository where I can also push my images to. And then I also have one more thing which I have pre-created, that is Azure Kubernetes Services Cluster. And I have also script available. How do you do that? Right? It takes few minutes, which I wanted to save during my demonstration. So that's the whole idea of the whole overall architecture. So if I want to show you how I start with it, first let me show you what is there in the virtual machine. So let me go back to this resource group and then open the virtual machine. So this is a Ubuntu 20.04, I believe. Now 18.04 virtual machine, right? That's a Ubuntu LTS, which is there. And then it also has a public IP address through which I will be able to connect to that. So let's try to connect to this virtual machine, right? So if I go ahead and then say, I want to connect. So let me say that I want to connect to that virtual machine. So if I want to connect to that virtual machine, so what I wanted to do is that I want to close this Azure Cloud Shell unnecessarily. I don't want to open that, but I want to open, let's say, keep this Ubuntu shell open. Now, if I want to connect to this machine, right, I can connect to it from, let's say, a PowerShell window as well. So let's use a PowerShell window. So if I say SSH, let me see if SSH is available. Yes, SSH is available. And then if I say this and then provide the IP address, then I should be able to connect. I say yes, add it to the host file, and then give the password of that machine. So password is, hopefully typing the right one, and they were inside that. Now what I wanted to also talk about this virtual machine is you have got all the tools installed. So mainly I have installed .NET, and then I have Docker. I have got Docker CE, the community edition, and then I have got kubectl. So kubectl is the client tool which I'll be using when I work against Azure Kubernetes services. So these are the three major tools which I'm using here, which I have installed, and I have a step-by-step and scripts available for you to go ahead and install by yourself. Right? We are not going into that details. So what I'm more interested in that is that when you have this virtual machine available, where the IP is this, how do you connect this IP address from your local Visual Studio? Now you can see the desktop which I'm using is basically a Windows 10 desktop, right? So I can go ahead and then say, hey, I want to say open the Visual Studio Code. So I open the Visual Studio Code, and it opens the Visual Studio Code in front of my screen, and I've got few things I can. So let me just close the existing folder, and I want to connect to the virtual machine where I have all my tools installed, which is not the local machine, right? It is in Azure. It has got a public IP address. So you can either use this Control-Shift-P, which allows you to open up the command shell and then say remote SSH. If you do that, what happens, you have this IP address, right, which is 191, and you do not have it here. So you say that add a new host. Now, while you add a new host, you type the full SSH, okay, and then you say that I want to put it inside that config file. And once you add that to config file, you can connect it from the prompt, and then it asks you what is the operating system you are using over there, right? So you say that I am going to use this, and then this is the password I'm going to use here. What is the password? So I'll say that password, and then I enter into that machine, and it tells me the thing at the bottom of my screen. So if you see over here at the bottom of the screen, right, you can see that it's showing some status and it got connected. So you can just see that the SSH 52.168.176.191 indicating now my Visual Studio is basically connected to another machine. Now if I go into terminal, it basically opens the terminal in that mode. So which means that I'm now directly working from my local Visual Studio to the Azure virtual machine, right? You can see that it is basically connected to that. Now just to make sure that I'm in the right folder, so pwd, so I'm in the right folder, I'm here. And then if I, let's say, want to create a demo folder, let's say mkdir demo 2021, and it goes into demo 2021. And then if you just say cd demo 2021, you are inside that. Now you can typically run all the command line utilities like .NET new MVC name sample web. So we'll just remove the complexities of HTTPS. It's going to go ahead and create ASP.NET Core MVC application with the name called sample web. So essentially it will go ahead and say that there will be a folder called sample web, and in that sample web you have all the files created, right, which you can now work on. Now just to check whether it is building properly, if I do that, then it will restore all the dependencies, run a build command, and it will tell me that whether it is successfully able to build the project or not, right? That's the first step, right? The step number one, my web application is ready. I'm not going into very details of this web development, so the simple web application is fine enough. Now if I say open folder, now this time you notice here, this is opening the folder from the remote machine, and the folder structure essentially tells you the same thing. So I go into the demo 2021, I get a sample web, and then that's my working folder. And I can open it in my Visual Studio Code, just like I open my any local folder, right? So it is exactly the same experience, and it is asking me to enter the password. So let's enter the password. So once I enter the password, if that is correct, it will be connecting me to that machine. Now, all the extension which I have locally is not available in that machine. So I can pretty much install remotely the extension to the machine, because extension sometimes is beyond Visual Studio Code. So for example, the extension I am gonna use is the Docker. And then if you see over here, it is already available because I installed, and I think I already have installed the C#. But for the first time, if you're using it, it will show you that it is not installed, and it will show you a small icon here just below the extension saying that installed to the remote IP address, and you just click here and it will install. Don't need anything specific about it, right? So you just don't need any extra feature. Now this is the working folder over here. You can see that I've got my files. I go to the view, I go to the home, I go to the index.cshtml, and I see the index, and then I see welcome Azure. If I change it, so let's put it something different, and then I save it. So it's kind of I'm done with this activity. So let me see, the autosave is enabled. That means every time I make any changes, it'll be autosaved. Now the thing is that I want to build it as a container, right? I want to put it inside the container. To do that, one thing you need in this project is a Docker file, which will have step-by-step instruction. What is the base image to take care? What is the folder you need to compile? What is the file you need to save to, etc. And to do that, you first need to bring in the Docker file into your project, right? So, and one of the extension which I'm using is the Docker, and I said add Docker files to the workspace. I choose this ASP.NET Core, and I say Linux, and I say port 80. And then what happens, I just need to add the task. So let me add the task here. And let me add the task. What is the build task? You need to first tell that is a .NET build task, okay? And I am done with this build task. So let me just reduce the font size, and then I say that I want to have a Docker file created. If this doesn't work, we have a Docker file we can work on, so we'll not spend too much time trying to fix the Visual Studio Code specific activity. So let's see, Linux 80, because I'm using that one. I don't want a Docker compose file. So now Docker file will be created, right? You will find a file called Docker file, which will have step by step. So Docker file is basically line after line instructions, right? And then you can see that in the Docker file. That's the Docker file which I was referring to, era step. So it is using ASP.NET 3.1 because that's the runtime using. If you're using 5, it'll eventually pick up the 5 and the Docker file generation will happen accordingly. But because my runtime is 3.1, that's correct. And then you can see that it is basically doing a .NET restore, .NET build, .NET publish. So all of them are different steps, right? So you can see that there are around 21 lines here in this, and then container will have an entry point, which is basically .NET and the DLL name. That's when my website will start, right? So that's the kind of architecture looks like at this point in time. My Docker file is ready. Now I can pretty much build that. Now to build the Docker file, it's fairly simple. So you need to make sure that your Docker is running. So if you come to this, you say Docker, and then you see the Docker CLI is installed. You say Docker images. You'll find the images available, right? And if you want to delete, let's say all the images, let's say I want to delete Docker images. So just to make sure that deleting the image, I'm just deleting force, and it deleted the image, right? So it's just basically kind of cleaning up the whole stuff. So if you have a lot of images, you can run a loop, and that's gonna go ahead and delete all of them one by one. So I kind of am doing that to make sure that there is no confusion in terms of like what I have done before. So if I say that, and then I go ahead and delete, and then you see that it is deleted. Now I say Docker images. You'll find that I have got only well, this one is left. So let me delete that. Docker RMI -- force, and that basically cleans up all the images I essentially do not need. So these are all base images that anyways will be downloaded. If it is there good enough, it will not ask for it. Now I want to run a simple Docker build command. If I want to run a simple Docker build command, what I need to do is that I need to stay in the folder where my CS project file is. And then if I have the same folder containing the Docker file, I do not need anything. Otherwise, I can specify the Docker file path with a -f, right? So I can say Docker build dot, and that should be enough. That's the simplest approach towards making a container out of your source code. So what you have here is an ASP.NET core application, which basically is now getting containerized from the base image for .NET Core 3.1, right? And it has got 17 steps, okay? You can see that there are line spaces between, but actually it's 21 lines. Probably we have 4 spaces available, so 17 steps. Each of the line is a step. So they are doing 17 steps, and once all of the steps are successfully done, then an image will be created and available in your local machine, and you will be able to see that image. Because I have not given any name to the image, let's see what happens. Okay, so you can see that it is almost kind of done now. 13, 17, and it is getting compiled. It's doing fine. 15, 16, and the last step is the 17, right? So that's done. Now if I say Docker images, you will find the image, newly created image, which got created 6 seconds ago, is the image, but essentially do not have any name at this point in time. It doesn't work like that, right? So if you really need to give a name, let's say I want to give a name Wriju. I want to give a name. So you say tag, and then I say Wriju/web. Okay, and then maybe you say latest. And if you run this, what happens? You just do the same stuff, right? It's quick, faster because it happened already, right? And if you just run this images, you'll find an image called Wriju/web latest, and this has got a name, right? You can now identify that. Now I can run, let's say, a Docker container out of this local image, right? So that is quite possible that I have got, let's say, an image, and I basically run that locally in my local machine, because I have got a Docker CE running at this point in time, which would allow me to run this image. If I have that kind of thing, right? So I can actually take that and then run it. Or another thing, best thing, or people generally do is that they put it in some registry. So let us use the Docker Hub. So if you go to hub.docker.com, and you can create a free account, and then you can create a repository. So let's create a repository called GA2021. Okay, that's the repository name. It has to be unique, combination with GA2021 and then demo. And then what I'm going to do is that leave it public and say create. Now it's going to go ahead and create the repository, and then you can see that it gives me also the name of the repository. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to come back and then run the same Docker build, but this time I'm going to use this repository name with tag latest. If I do that and run this command, it's going to quickly do that, run this Docker images, and you will see that there is a repository name which is matching with my Docker Hub repository name created, right? You notice here the image ID is the same because nothing has changed in between, right? I just ran another build with another tag. It's basically, you can also do retagging, right? Existing thing, you can retag it and give a different name. That's also, they're not occupying 424 MB, rather they are occupying 212 MB, right? That's a pointer, right? But they are not totally, because the image name is the same here. Okay, so that they are the same image with a different pointer name, right? Let's put it that way. Now this is the image which I'm finally going to use and push it to my Docker Hub. Now, if you notice here in the Docker Hub, which I just now have created, there is nothing right now at this point in time. If I need to push it to, let's say, the Docker Hub, I just copy this Docker push, and then I say latest. Ideally, you should be maintaining the version number and then push it. So now you see that all the local images and their layers are getting pushed into my Docker Hub, which basically is a public thing. And because I created as a public, now anybody can use it without really worrying too much about it, right? So you can see that now it is allowed. Now, one thing I already have been working in this machine, so it did not really stop me, is that to be able to connect to a repository, right, and to push something, you need to log in. And for that, you say Docker login. By doing that, it logs into that, right? And it keeps that cache, so it did not ask me. So let's see if it really pushed it in the right repository or not, whether we are having a right, let's say, login or not. Now it should tell me that yes, if that is visible to me, right? If I, let's say, push it, yeah, you can see that a few seconds ago, a latest image operating system Linux got pushed, right? Now we are good. So we now got this image, right? So called Wriju GH. So let me do one thing. Let me put it okay, let's just keep this as placeholder. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use this image quite often, so that's why I kept it over here. Now, another thing I wanted to talk about is that you have done it with the Docker registry. Now what happened if you have, let's say, already another kind of registry, which is sort of like a private registry or an enterprise ready registry like Azure Container Registry. If you use something like that, which is like this, and then if you see that it allows you to log in using some sort of credential, right? So that is asking you to, this is the URL, right? Now, what happens when you try to log into this? You use Docker login, and you use the thing as this, and then it will ask you to provide the username, which is essentially the username is this, and the password is whatever the password is. So let's run this in my let's say terminal. So let me open this terminal in a bigger screen. Now if I see that, if I run this, okay, and it says that login successful because I have logged in earlier, so it did not ask me again, so it has got a stored available, so it is now logged in. Now what happens if I try to push this image? What happened? Let's say, right, it says that it exists, right? So there is something which I need to take care. What I need to take care is that when I want to push this image to my Azure container registry, right? If you notice at this point in time, the repositories, if I go back into this repositories, right? There is no repository, though it said that it pushed. Actually, what happened, I need to maintain the naming convention. So what I need to do essentially over here in my Docker build is that I need to create a build which matches the repository name, right? Not anything like Wriju Coach, because that's not the repository name. Okay, by default it picks up. Now that's the repository name I need to use, right? That's a server URL, and whatever the repository you need to specify, you put a slash and then give that, and colon whatever the tag you want to say. If you do that, now there will be a new image available locally which would look like something with the name I have given. Right now you can say that I want to push this one, right? So if you say docker push this and then say latest, and it'll now get pushed into the actual Azure repository. Now the actual push happening, right? There is no confusion because the names are just different, right? It's not the Docker Hub. It's my own personal Azure Container Registry, which is a private one, right? So now it is getting pushed. Now you can see that. You will see that if I refresh it, you will see that available over here, GA2021, and then you will be able to also identify that it has got a latest one, and then if you come over here, it shows you the Docker pull. So if I do a Docker pull, it'll pull the image because I have done it from the local machine. If I run this locally, let's run it locally. If I run this locally, what happens that it will tell that it's already there because you pushed that same into the Azure container registry, right? So it's not something different. So that's why it'll not override or change, because that's how the Docker is quite efficient in terms of using the bandwidth, right? Now we have got an image available. Now what we want to do is that we want to now run this image in a container, right? Either that container could be a local container. So if you, let's say, want to run it in a local container, saying docker run, you say that, and then you say interactive terminal, which will tell you what exactly is happening within that container. And then if I use rn, that will make sure that once the container is exited, it is deleted, and then I will do a port forwarding of 5000 to 80. What happens is that it basically forwards the port 5000 to 80, and then I give a name to sample web, and then I just say that will it work? Let's see. I pick up the image from my ACR. So it's asking me to download the SDKs, right? So which I need to run in the context. So it is coming from within the container itself. So let us try to run this, let's say, in ACI, that's Azure Container Instance. And to do that, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a container instance, right? So let me just try to run this command, az container, that basically create, and then I use the group as $G. Remember that I had all the, that will not work here. So let me run it from here, because this is the screen where I kind of have that. So az container create g $group, and then I just give a name, all ACI name and image. Okay, so that should be fine. I can also use the Docker Hub image. Let's see, use the Docker Hub image. I'll say that that's a Docker Hub image. And then what I need is that I need a public IP address. Now I'll say ports 80. That my port I need to open. And then I say DNS name label Conto 334. Okay, so that should work fine. Now let me use my initials also, just in case it's not unique. So it will create a DNS. So with this initials, so it has to be unique. So let's just try that out and see if we are able to create. We missed R here, so let me put that R. Ports, and then if this is gonna get created, right, now we will be able to get a public IP address from which we can actually run the container, right? So that's how the work should look like. So now you can see that it is running, and once this is kind of done, we will be able to see the container up and running in the Azure portal, and we can use the public DNS, that's the public endpoint, to talk to or interact with that like an application user, right? So you can even go inside that container and then see what is happening, but finally you're having an application, right? That's the whole idea of hosting a container, and that's what it will give you, an ability to really look for the container is running, right? So this is just a test, right? This is not the final destination. Our final destination is Azure Kubernetes service, right? That's where we run our containers, right? So we will not be using the container from there. Yeah, it is now done. So you can see that this is kind of done. Now if I go back to my Azure portal, go to the resource group, I will be able to see that there is something, let's just refresh, called the ACI, right, that got created. And if I look into that ACI under the containers, I'll find a container which is my Docker Hub container, right? It is kind of terminated, so it has some issue in terms of not able to run it properly, right? So if you happen to see that container and inspect it, what exactly is the wrong, you will be able to figure it out. But we're not going to do that over here. What we're going to do is that we're going to go ahead and then use the AKS to host the container. So if you notice here in the Docker Hub, I've got a list of repositories. So let me go to this repositories, and then I have got a repository called GAB Web. Okay, if I GAB Web 2021, if I use this GAB Web 2021, And let's say I go to this, and then I say that, you know what, this is a problematic container and I don't want this container in to work again. So I don't want this container to have available. So let's just go back and I say that let me just check the bin. Okay, that looks fine. Now if I go back to the container, right, it's gone, right? That's, you can see that it's no more there. It's kind of cleaned quickly. Now what happens if I go ahead and let's say I want to, if I have typed correctly, let me just cross verify the name GA2021, and then if I run this again, it's gonna go ahead and create the same Azure container instance with DNS, okay, and that's Conto WG34. And once this is done, you should be able to see it because this works. I have tested it. Now what happens when you have this kind of thing, right, where you kind of like have the issue with the container, you should be fixing it and then making it available. We are not doing it, but you should be checking that out. Now what do we need to do over here at this point in time? Once this is done, we need to connect it to Azure Kubernetes services. And when we say that we want to connect it to Azure Kubernetes services, essentially we'll be deploying the same image, right? So that's the image we will be deploying, right? And if you notice here that this image is, let me just paste it over here. This image is what our base image would look like. Now let us take you to the Kubernetes cluster which we have created. And this Kubernetes cluster has got two nodes. Now if you essentially go to the Kubernetes cluster, right? So it basically creates a set of virtual machines, right? And then you can see that it gives you some information about, like, you have got a one node pool network using KubeNet, and the Kubernetes version is 1.18. And if you click on connect, it shows you the command which you need to use to connect this Kubernetes cluster, which is WGAKS2, right? So what I can do over here, I can just go back and check the status. It looks it is working fine now. If I now come back to this resource group and I just go into refresh this, and I see that ACR fine, and I just check the container status inside this. If it is running, then everything is fine. So you can see that it is running. There's no issue at this point in time, which means that it is running. So I can go into the overview, and then what I can do, I can copy this URL and I can just run it. If I run, what happens, it opens my ASP.NET portal, the same ASP.NET portal, and you can see that it is now available publicly, right? Because it is running from ACI, which has got a public endpoint. Let us use this to connect to the Azure Kubernetes services. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go ahead and connect to the Kubernetes service, and I have got a Kubernetes cluster already created, right? So AKS name is WGAKS2, okay? And then if I just try to grab the Kubernetes, let's say details, what is the secret of the Kubernetes To do that, use AZAKS get credentials. If you do that, then you say G $G and AKS, sorry, $AKS name. If you do that, then it basically download that into local file, right? That kubeconfig file. I have done that already, so I copied that kubeconfig into my local folder. So that's exercise is already done, so I'm not going into that. And then if I just use the alias for kubectl, which is oftentimes being used, right? I can basically connect and then see that. Now, what I want to also do is that I want to also use this. Let's use this Cloud Shell, okay? shell.azure.com. And I'll tell you why I'm using this, okay? Now, what I'm trying to do is that no, sorry. I wanted to copy this one, not that one. So let me quickly modify this. Now, by running this, what happens, the Kubernetes dashboard opens up, and it's a live experience, right? Which basically allows you to see what exactly is happening live in the Kubernetes cluster. And I'll run side by side, which will give you some sense of what exactly is happening over here. So let us just run this, reduce the size of the screen, and then you can say that I want to run this kubeconfig, and hopefully this is in my local .q folder. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to this PC and either do this, I go to this, I go to WSO, and then I go to Cube, and I select the config, and I say sign in. Now what happens, I kind of have signed in. Let me click properly to the Kubernetes dashboard, which is a nice graphical representation of what exactly is happening in the Kubernetes, right? You have got deployments, you have got pods, you have got many things. So I don't want this deployment to run at this point in time. So let me delete the deployment, and it's gonna go ahead and kill the deployment. You can see that deployment will be killed immediately, right? And then if you notice here, the web replica set, and even the service has got something called web. So let me delete that service also. Okay. So it's gonna go ahead and clean that up, right? And what is this waiting for? Let me delete this. Okay, so let us check what is the status. K get deploy. If I see that the deployment if there is any deployment, it should show up. If no, then it should not be visible over here. So my Kubernetes cluster is running. I can now basically now it is not deleted. So k delete deploy web. Okay, now it will be deleted. Right, let me just try to refresh this page. And see if my dashboard shows up with some different UI. Because now it should not show me all the 3 pods, 3 replica sets, and a deployment, because I have deleted all of them, right? So all of them will be cleaned up. One thing will be left over is the service, right? So there's still some issue, right? So you can see that that's okay. So we do not have the deployment yet. So let me just quickly check get deploy, and it should not show me any deployment. Okay, let me check. Yeah, there is no deployment. K delete SVC web. That service will be deleted, so that I knew that there is a service running, so it will be deleted. Now there is no service, no thing. Now what I can do, I can now spin up a new deployment. Now to do that, what I could do, I could just simply say k create deploy nginx, and then I say image nginx replicas equals to 2, and it should show the replicas. Let me run it one more time, see if this works. Now I have created a new deployment with a name called nginx, which has got 2 replicas, right? So that kind of is now available. So you can see that. Let me. Yeah. Yeah, now you can see that sometime it is coming and going. I don't know what is problem here, but generally it should show you the deployment spot. But never mind, you can always see that here, k get deployment, and if you do that, you will see that deployment is here. Now that's running. Now if I want to make this page as a public page, what I need to do is I need a service, and that service will be of type load balancer. So I'll say k expose nginx deployment nginx, and then I say port equals to 80, and then I say type equals to load balancer. If you do that, it basically goes ahead and opens a service. Now if you say k get svc, it will show you the IP address you can use. So that will give you a public IP address like this. Okay, so if you go to your browser and then try to open this IP address, you will see the nginx landing page, which is coming from the AKS. Now using the same mechanism, if I go ahead and run the previous command, which basically you created a deployment, you use the nginx, but you can now use this this image, which is coming from, let's say, Docker Hub. Okay, and then if you say that same replicas too, nginx is already available, so we'll not be giving the same name, rather we'll be giving sample web. Okay, So that's the name of the deployment. So sample web deployment is created. Now what I can do, it's still not accessible to public. What I can do, I can simply run the same command I ran before, which is the expose command. And then this expose command, I will say sample web, and then expose it in the port 80 as a load balancer. Now to see what is the IP address, I just get C, and you can see that the external IP is still pending. So let's just wait for a moment to get the external IP. So maybe I can delete deploy nginx, and then I just delete service also nginx. So I kind of deleted them so that I can free up an IP address, and hopefully this time the IP address will be allocated to my sample web. So let's see that if that works, and then I will be able to connect using that same public IP address to my sample web folder application, which is getting loaded from Docker Hub to the AKS using a public IP address. So let's see that experience. So once that is done, that should now show up. So let me try one more time if this is visible. Okay, cat, as we see, will now show me the services, and then you can see that it has now an IP address called 51. Okay, now if I go into this page and replace this with the 51 IP address, and that should land me to the home page of my ASP.NET, which is coming from the AKS. Now you can understand like how the overall flow looks like, having to have your Visual Studio configured and then created in the Docker Hub or ACR, pulling it to the ACI, and then finally pulling it into the AKS. With this, I want to thank and hope you enjoyed the discussion. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.